compass for me right now. To go back to certain questions that I think we sort of tend to lose sight of sometimes. And I guess I wanted to, and I think I just wanted to also say that this question of gradualism that you said, I think that's really critical. And I think along with gradualism is also a question of realism, right? So in some sense, so it is realism that we're talking about when we talk about the engagement that we have and the fact that change is always incremental. And right now, I think somehow because of the ways in which conversation happens, there are always these really large ambitions which seem to have no grounding in what is happening around us. And I think that's a very disorienting place to be, which also leads to despair. And I think this question of realism and gradualism is a very important counter that we have to constantly remind ourselves. And I guess I have one question, and it's to do with what you said about justice and love, because I sometimes feel like I can be a bit cynical, and I think sometimes I feel like love is the only concept we have left. So we tend to keep going back to it. And I was thinking about what you said, and it resonated with me, this question of what you were talking about, Ambedkar said about justice and love. Because there's somebody that I know in Kutch, who's a fisher person, and he also talks to me about love, but for him, his resistance, his Virod, is tied into love, is tied into affection for his environment and the changes that he's seeing around. But for him, that affection or that love is a very contextual affection and love. It is a local affection and love, right? So then when we talk about love, in the sort of, and for him, his fight for rights is tied into that affection, into that love. But when we talk about love at a different scale, then really, like, I do wonder who is this love directed towards, right? Who is this love for? Because as you said again, the question of we in a country like India is really troublesome. So then when we talk about love, who was it, right, that we're directing that love to? And I was wondering if you might have it. I'm just trying to think about ways of thinking through it rather than an answer perhaps.
For me, it's always intriguing and interesting. Ambedkar keeps coming back to the question of love. In different ways, he uses that word. Of course, he uses the word love itself, but then another favorite word again and again he uses is social fellowship. Constantly, and it's drawn from this. It's again very interesting. I'm talking of sources. It's from William Morris, the English socialist, from one of his poems actually. So social fellowship is a term. Then he uses Karuna, Maitri in Buddha and his Dhamma. But I think what's interesting about the way he puts love and justice together for me is a very useful thing, because the larger quotation is, it's somewhere there in my phone, maybe I can find it before I go. Basically what he's saying is that apart from the family, where love is the wellspring of relationships, we assume, what else can guarantee love? Only justice can guarantee love. So he's, in a global sense for him, love is not just affection, love is not simply an affective domain, it is also the form that justice takes. Justice has to happen for love to be anchored. You can't have love in terms of let's forgive and forget. You can't have love in terms of I'll be compassionate towards my oppressor. It is not that sort of thing. It is very much justice that has to happen. But again and again he would say this both in Buddha and Dhamma and elsewhere. But justice must be done in such a way that you don't leave behind bitterness. And for him the whole understanding of that comes from the history of the First World War. That what was done to Germany at that time, humiliation and destruction, led to the Second World War. So basically justice has to be done in a manner that does not cause bitterness. That is also to be done without hatred. So I think it's a tall order how all of these things can be done. I mean, there are lots of people whose necks we want to squeeze and we want to thrash. All of that is there. We all feel angry. But I think in a normative sense he makes that very evident. And he comes back to that whole question about bitterness again and again. Because one of his, in that polemical piece, Buddha, Karl Marx also, he says, look, I mean, what Stalin did, or the Russians did by way of redistribution is great. And I think sometimes some dictatorship like that is not half bad for India, where you get people to part with property and do something about economic justice. But at the same time, what have we lost? What has the Soviet Union lost by that move? It has also lost the possibility of, because that was given priority, liberty was sacrificed. It's very interesting. Here he would say equality was sacrificed in the name of liberty. There he says liberty was sacrificed. And it's important to persuade the population that you've got to sort of do these things because it's important for the greater common good than do this by force. Anything you do by force and you don't compensate will never sustain itself. So for him, he always felt that even in something as practical as the Zamindari abolition bill, that famous case he argued for the Zamindar of Kapurthala, and I couldn't find his own original arguments, but I found the judgment online. And in the judgment, he says that the judge says that Ambedkar also argued, saying that the zamindari abolition does nothing for the Dalit agricultural laborer. How can it be in the public interest? And also, you have to any lack of compensation will further fortify the zamindar in their own feudal whatever. So he makes all these points. So he is very interested in justice in a certain manner, and I take it to mean that justice has to happen, but how do you do it without setting in motion a cycle of recrimination and further injustice? So what is the role of hatred and bitterness in all of this? How can you keep these at bay while you actually perform acts of justice? Which is I think an interesting and a very complicated thing. So, and that's where he keeps going back to the Buddha also. Justice without bitterness or hatred. He doesn't give up on justice, and no one should think his invocations of love are sentimental. They are not.
That is really interesting.
Yeah. And he also says, my love is a reflex of the hatred I feel for things are wrong.
Yes, exactly. I think that's
Yes.
that's the example that struck with me.
Yeah.
Because, the love is coming from a space of being squeezed.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So it is the sort of the very difficult situations around that have made this person think of resistance in relationship to love. And that is the articulation.
Yes. But that love has to end in justice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think on that note, love has to end in justice, and how do we really build democracy, and how do we practice constitutional and close here. Thank you so much, Geetha.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.